I woke up to the slow, suffocating realization that something was terribly wrong. My head pounded like a war drum, my mouth dry as sandpaper. The stale scent of cheap motel sheets clung to my skin. The room was dim, the flickering neon sign outside casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. My body felt heavy, too heavy, like I had been drugged. And then it hit me. Where the hell was I? My heart pounded as I tried to piece together my last clear memory. It was supposed to be a vacation, our first in years. Emily had planned everything. A romantic getaway, she'd called it. Just the two of us and her best friends, Laura and Jessica. A little odd that her friends were tagging along, but I didn't question it. Now I was alone. My clothes were missing. My phone, nowhere in sight. My wallet, gone. I staggered to my feet, my balance unsteady. A sharp nausea clawed at my stomach, my vision spinning. That's when I saw it. A note taped to the mirror. Survive this, genius. I ripped the paper off the glass, my hands shaking. That was Emily's handwriting. The door suddenly burst open. A motel staff member stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. Your room's overdue, he grunted. No credit cards left, buddy. Your account's maxed out. I felt my stomach drop. They took everything. My mind raced. I grabbed the landline phone on the nightstand, dialing my bank. The robotic voice on the other end confirmed my worst fear. Every last cent was drained. Credit cards maxed. Savings wiped. I clenched my jaw. Emily. That be asterisk TCH. Flashes of our last night together flooded my mind. The laughter. The drinks. Emily whispering something to Laura and Jessica before they all excused themselves. I should have known. The signs were there. The secretive texts, the sudden trips, the way she kept her phone face down on the table. But I never thought she'd do something like this. The real gut punch. I had loved her. I had trusted her. And she had thrown me away like garbage, leaving me drugged and penniless in a foreign country. I stumbled to the window, gripping the edge of the dirty sill for balance. Below, the street was alive with neon lights and the sound of engines roaring through the night. Somewhere out there, Emily and her friends were celebrating. They had gotten away with it. They had laughed as they drove off, thinking I wouldn't make it out. They thought I wouldn't survive. But they underestimated me. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to come back. And when I did, they would regret ever crossing me. I had 6 months to rebuild. 6 months to plot. And when they saw me again, they would wish they had left me for dead. The first few weeks were hell. No money, no ID, no way to prove who I was. I was just another stranded tourist in a country where I barely spoke the language. I learned quickly how to survive, how to hustle, how to get by with nothing but determination and the seething hatred boiling inside me. I took jobs under the table, working construction, dishwashing, whatever it took. The rage kept me going. Every time exhaustion threatened to take over, I heard their laughter in my head. Survive this, genius. They thought I was weak, but they didn't know me. It took 6 months to crawl out of the gutter they threw me into. 6 months to rebuild what they stole. I didn't just survive. I became something else. Stronger, sharper, meaner. I didn't need them. I didn't need my old life. But that didn't mean I was going to let them walk away. Then, one night, I saw her. Emily, the woman who ruined me. The woman I had once called my wife. She was laughing, her arm wrapped around some guy in an expensive suit, stepping out of a luxury car. She looked happy. She looked untouched by the destruction she left behind. The bastard she was with whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back, giggling. I clenched my fists so hard my nails cut into my palms. That night, I started making calls. I had contacts now, people who owed me favors. I had spent half a year in the shadows, learning how to move in ways I never had before. Money wasn't a problem anymore. Information wasn't a problem anymore. Emily had no idea what was coming. So I waited. The first move was simple. Her credit cards? Declined. One by one, until the panic started setting in. I made sure the banks flagged her accounts. Her finances were locked, frozen, questioned. She tried calling customer service. She tried demanding answers. But she got nothing. Then her car. Gone. Towed in the middle of the night with no explanation. She spent hours on the phone, cursing, trying to find it. The police had no records. The tow companies had no reports. Then, her phone. Cut off. No service. No way to access her bank, her contacts, nothing. I watched from a distance as she unraveled, as the first cracks in her perfect little world appeared. She had no idea I was behind it. Not yet. Then came the messages. The first one was simple. "Survive this, sweetheart." She read it in front of me, her face draining of color. She looked around, eyes darting, searching for something, someone. I was right there, and she didn't even see me. Emily's hands shook as she gripped her phone, staring at the message. She looked around, paranoia creeping into her expression. I stayed in the shadows, watching. She had no idea I was standing less than 20 feet away, unseen but fully present. She turned to her friend, Laura. The same Laura who helped drug me, strip me of everything, and leave me for dead. They whispered frantically, Laura's face growing just as pale as Emily's. They both knew. Someone was coming for them. I let them stew in fear for a few days. No more texts. No more messages. Just silence. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, abandoned, powerless, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Then, I made my next move. Her apartment? Evicted. I had made sure of it. A few well-placed calls, a little bit of money in the right pockets, and suddenly, her lease was revoked. No warning. No explanation. Just a final notice taped to her door, informing her she had 24 hours to vacate. I watched from across the street as she broke down, screaming at the property manager. She was furious, demanding answers, but none came. Then, her boyfriend. The rich bastard she had wrapped herself around after throwing me away. He dumped her. I made sure he saw what kind of woman she really was. He found out about the money she drained from our accounts, the fraud, the trail of lies. He wanted nothing to do with her. She was unraveling, and I wasn't done yet. The night she lost everything, she sat alone on a park bench, her makeup smeared from crying, staring at her dead phone like it would somehow save her. That's when I sent the next message. 121 missed calls. She gasped so hard I heard it from where I stood. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. List of missed calls. All from an unknown number. All unanswered. Her breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw it. Real fear. She gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. I could see her mind racing, trying to piece it together. Was it me? Was it someone else? Was she imagining things? Laura was already gone. After the eviction, the boyfriend, the frozen accounts, she had jumped ship, leaving Emily alone to deal with the storm. That was the thing about people like them. They were loyal only when it was convenient. Emily wiped at her face, swallowing back her panic, then stood up and rushed to a cab. I followed. She wasn't going home. She had no home anymore. She wasn't going to a friend. There were no friends left. Instead, she went to a motel, one of those cheap, grimy places where people go when they've got nowhere else to be. I waited. She locked the door behind her, barricading herself inside. Like that would help. I let her sit in silence for an hour. Then two. Then, I made my move. A knock on the door. Soft at first. Then louder. She held her breath. I saw the shadow of her feet under the door, frozen in place. Another knock. This time, her breath hitched audibly. I sent another message. Open up. She screamed. I smiled. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers shaking too much to type properly. I knew she was trying to call someone. But who? There was no one left. Another knock. This time, it wasn't me. I had paid someone. Just a random guy who looked shady enough to scare her. A few bucks, a simple request. Knock on the door, and then walk away. He had no idea what he was part of. She gasped, stumbled backward, her breathing ragged. I left before she could regain her senses. The next morning, she checked out in a hurry, looking over her shoulder the whole time. I followed again, unseen. She made one last desperate move. Laura. I had been waiting for this. Laura was her last hope, and I had already made sure that bridge was burnt. Emily showed up at her door, pounding like a madwoman. When Laura finally answered, it was nothing like Emily expected. Laura slapped her. Hard. I could hear every word. This is all your fault. You said it was safe. You said he'd never come back. I lost everything because of you. I watched as Emily stood there, stunned, betrayed. She had no one. That's when I sent the final message. Survive this, genius. She dropped the phone. Emily staggered back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She bent down, her trembling fingers fumbling to pick up her phone, but it slipped from her grip again. Laura stood in the doorway, arms crossed, glaring down at her like she was nothing. Exactly what she was. You need to leave, Laura hissed. I don't want to see you ever again. Emily's lip quivered. Laura, please. You know I wouldn't have done this if... If what? Laura cut her off, her voice sharp as a blade. If you didn't think you'd get caught? If you weren't so sure he'd disappear forever? Emily looked away, biting her lower lip, the tears in her eyes not from guilt, but from fear. Laura scoffed, stepping back inside. Don't come back. The door slammed in her face. She was alone. Completely, hopelessly alone. She stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. Her face went through all the stages: shock, anger, helplessness. I watched it all, drinking in every second of it. Then, finally, she moved. She had nowhere to go, no money, no safety net. Her hands were shaking as she hailed a cab, but I already knew her destination. She was going to the only place she could. Her parents. I let her believe, just for a moment, that she could still crawl back into the comfort of home, that she could run away from the mess she made. But I had been ahead of her at every step. By the time she arrived, her mother was waiting outside, arms folded, her father standing behind her, his expression unreadable. Emily rushed forward, her eyes welling up. Mom, The slap echoed through the quiet street. I felt nothing watching it. Emily's hand flew to her cheek, stunned. Her mother's face was twisted in disgust. We know everything, she spat. We know what you did. Emily shook her head rapidly, her voice breaking. No, it's not. Who told you? Who do you think? Her mother's voice dripped with venom. Emily's breath hitched. She turned to her father, desperate, pleading. Dad, please. Get off our property, he said, his voice firm. You're not welcome here. Her world collapsed in that instant. She sank to her knees, sobbing, but no one came to help her. I had made sure of it. I sent the last message of the night. Game over. She screamed and threw her phone against the pavement. It shattered on impact. I turned and walked away. This was only the beginning. Emily sat there on the pavement, hands gripping her hair, her whole body shaking. She had nothing. No money. No friends. No family. And now, no phone. She looked around, desperate for a solution, but there was none. The night air was thick with the weight of her collapse. She clutched at her chest, gasping like she couldn't breathe, but I knew better. She wasn't suffocating. She was finally feeling what I had felt. Abandoned. Helpless. Destroyed. She forced herself to her feet, wiping at her face, smudging what was left of her makeup. She turned, took a step, then another. Her head darted left and right, looking for an escape, an answer, anything. But there was nowhere to run. I watched from a distance, unseen. She wandered aimlessly for hours. She tried an ATM, declined. She tried a gas station for a prepaid phone, no money. She tried calling her old boss from a payphone. He had already heard what she did. He told her to never call again. One by one, every door she had ever relied on slammed shut in her face. She was breaking. I could see it in her eyes, the way her movements grew slower, more uncertain, the way her shoulders slumped with every rejection. She finally ended up where I wanted her, at a sleazy motel on the edge of town, the kind that smelled like mildew and regret. She hesitated before stepping inside. She had no other choice. She approached the counter, her voice weak, broken. I just need a room for the night. Please. The clerk, a tired-looking man with half-lidded eyes, barely glanced at her. Cash or card? Emily swallowed. She hesitated. Then, for the first time, she did something she never thought she'd have to do. She begged. Please. Just for one night. I'll pay you back, I swear. The clerk gave her a long, bored stare before shaking his head. No freebies. She gritted her teeth. You don't understand, I understand plenty, he interrupted. Now get out. Her lips trembled. Her fingers dug into the counter like she could somehow change the outcome if she just held on tight enough. But nothing changed. Nothing ever would. She turned and stumbled back out into the night. She was completely alone. And now she knew it. I let her sit there in the cold for a while, just long enough to make sure she understood the weight of her new reality. Then, I sent my next move. A single folded paper slipped under her arm as she sat huddled against the wall. She didn't notice at first. Then, she did. Her fingers fumbled to unfold it, her breath catching in her throat as she read. Want to survive this? She stiffened. I watched the way her hands trembled, the way her eyes darted frantically around the empty parking lot. She knew, in that moment, that I was still out there, that I was watching, that this wasn't over. It would never be over. Emily's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she clutched the note. Her eyes darted across the empty parking lot, searching, desperate to see something. Asterisk, asterisk, anything asterisk, asterisk. That would explain how it had gotten there. Nothing. Just silence. Just her own reflection in the motel's grimy window, looking back at her like a ghost of the woman she used to be. She swallowed hard, fingers tightening around the paper as she reread the words. Want to survive this. Her hands shook so much she nearly tore it. She knew what it meant. I was here. I was watching. Asterisk, asterisk. She shot to her feet, stumbling back toward the payphone. I let her dial. Her fingers hit the numbers so fast she barely breathed between presses. Then, the line rang. Once. Twice. A third time. Then, asterisk, asterisk, click. Asterisk, asterisk. Silence. She froze. A cold, mechanical voice filled the receiver. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Her stomach dropped. She tried again. Nothing. She tried another number. Jessica. Disconnected. Laura. Disconnected. One after another, every single person she had ever leaned on was gone. Erased. Like they had never existed. She dropped the phone. It swung wildly from its cord, smacking against the metal base with a hollow clatter. Her legs buckled, and she caught herself against the wall, her chest heaving. She was trapped. No money. No friends. No way out. And worst of all, she knew this wasn't bad luck. This was deliberate. This was me. She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to think, trying to find a way out. But her thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and exhaustion. Then, the streetlights flickered. She jerked her head up, her heart racing. It was a tiny thing, something that shouldn't have meant anything. But in that moment, in her fractured, unraveling state, it was everything. The world around her was turning against her. She started walking. Fast. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Her sneakers slapped against the cracked pavement, breath coming in ragged bursts. She turned down an alley, desperate to disappear, to vanish into the city like a shadow. But I had already planned for that. The second she rounded the corner, she stopped dead. Because there, taped to the side of a flickering street lamp, was a photograph. Her photograph. A picture of her laughing, drink in hand, on the night she and her friends abandoned me. Her blood ran ice cold. Below the photo, scrawled in black ink, was a single word. Run. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth. And then, asterisk, asterisk, footsteps. Asterisk, asterisk. Not mine. Not yet. Just enough to send her sprinting. Emily ran. Her breath tore from her throat in ragged gasps, her feet slamming against the pavement as she sprinted through the darkened streets. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Away from the photo. Away from the note. Away from me. She turned a corner too fast, stumbling, nearly falling. Her shoulder slammed into the brick wall of a closed shop, but she didn't stop. The city blurred around her, neon lights streaking past in a smear of panic and adrenaline. She darted into another alley, chest heaving. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly in her ears it drowned out everything else. Then, silence. She turned, her back pressed against the cold bricks. Nothing. The streets were empty. Her pulse still hammered, but there was no one there. No footsteps. No shadows. No sign that anyone had followed. Her fingers trembled as she wiped sweat from her forehead. Was she losing her mind? She reached into her pocket, forgetting for a second that her phone was gone. She had nothing. No way to call for help. No one to call even if she could. She let out a shaky breath and forced herself to move. Slower this time. More careful. She had to think. She needed money. A safe place. Somewhere I couldn't find her. Asterisk, asterisk, or at least where she could convince herself I wouldn't. Asterisk, asterisk. A bus station. She made up her mind and walked fast, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes scanning every shadow. She had no ID, no way to buy a ticket, but she would figure it out. Then she saw it. A black SUV, parked across the street. Tinted windows. No headlights. Her stomach clenched. She turned her head away, forced herself to keep walking. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just. The engine roared to life. Her entire body tensed. She ran. She heard the tires screech, the sudden acceleration. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed, but she didn't stop. She bolted across the street, narrowly dodging a passing car. A horn blared. A driver cursed. She didn't look back. She could hear the SUV now, following, keeping pace. Not trying to run her down. Asterisk asterisk, just toying with her. Asterisk asterisk. Tears stung her eyes as she sprinted down another alley. A dead-end fence loomed ahead. She jumped. Scrambled. Fingernails digging into metal. Her shoe slipped, but she threw herself over the top just as the SUV's brakes screeched behind her. She hit the ground hard, rolling, barely feeling the pain as she pushed herself up and kept running. The city swallowed her whole. She didn't stop until she reached the bus station. She stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The place was nearly empty, just a few homeless people curled up on benches, a clerk behind the counter lazily flipping through a magazine. She staggered to a corner, collapsing onto the cold plastic seat. She was safe. For now. Her whole body shook as she tried to catch her breath, tried to slow the panic clawing at her chest. Then, she heard it. A phone ringing. Not hers. She turned her head slowly. On the seat next to her was a cheap, disposable phone. One she had never seen before. It was ringing. Her breath hitched. The screen had no caller ID. Just 2 words. Pick up. She swallowed hard, her fingers hovering over the device. Then, slowly, she picked it up and pressed it to her ear. Silence. For a moment, nothing. Then, a voice. My voice. Still think this is a game, sweetheart? She choked on a gasp. I laughed softly. Run all you want, I said. You'll never be ahead of me again. The line went dead. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. She had never felt fear like this in her life. Emily sat frozen, the dead phone lying on the grimy floor beside her. Her mind raced, her chest heaving as she struggled to process what just happened. I had found her. Again. No matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she tried to escape, I was always one step ahead. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. No, she wouldn't break. Not like this. She forced herself to stand, legs shaky, and stumbled toward the bathroom. She needed a moment to think, to breathe. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she splashed cold water onto her face, gripping the edges of the sink. She stared at herself in the dirty mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The smeared makeup, the sunken eyes, the hollow expression. This wasn't her. Emily had always been the one in control, the one who manipulated, who got away with everything. But now she was the one running, the one who was powerless. She hated it. She hated me. She gritted her teeth and straightened her back, forcing herself to stand tall. No more running. If I wanted to come for her, then fine. She would fight back. She marched out of the bathroom, fists clenched, scanning the station. She needed money, a weapon, something. And that's when she saw it. A man, alone, sitting in the corner, counting a wad of cash. Some lowlife, probably dealing in stolen goods. Perfect. She approached him quickly, her movements sharp. He barely had time to react before she was in front of him. I need a favor, she said, voice low, controlled. He smirked, eyeing her up and down. Yeah? And what's in it for me, sweetheart? She forced a smile, leaning in closer. Anything you want. His grin widened. He never saw the punch coming. Her fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the floor. His cash scattered across the tiles. Emily grabbed a handful and ran before he could even process what happened. She didn't stop until she was outside. She had a plan now. First, a burner phone. Then, transportation. She would disappear. She ducked into a convenience store, tossing cash on the counter for a cheap phone and a knife. The clerk barely looked up as he rang her up. She stepped outside, breathing deeply. The panic was still there, but now it had purpose. She would outplay me. She would win. The moment she stepped toward the curb, a black car pulled up. Her stomach flipped. She turned to run, but it was too late. The back door swung open, and before she could react, hands grabbed her, yanking her inside. She screamed, kicked, fought like a wild animal, but the grip was too strong. The door slammed shut. The car peeled off into the night. The hands released her, and she scrambled to the far end of the seat, her breath coming in sharp gasps. And then she saw me, sitting across from her, calm, waiting. She went still, her entire body locked in place. I smiled. Miss me? Her lip curled, her hands clenching into fists. Go to hell. I chuckled. I already have. Thanks to you. She lunged. I caught her by the wrist and twisted, pinning her in place. She gasped in pain, her eyes burning with rage. You think you can beat me at my own game? I murmured, leaning in close. You have no idea what I've become. Her breath shuddered. For the first time, she understood. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about control. I let go, and she pulled back, rubbing her wrist. Her eyes darted to the door, calculating. I shook my head. You're not getting away this time. She swallowed hard. The car slowed. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. This is your last chance, Emily. Her breath hitched. I smiled. Survive this. The door opened, and everything went black.